Today's video is sponsored by War Thunder, more on that later. There are many ways to run a nation, whether with a light touch or an iron fist. There's an intention on the part of a country to make something of its people. That could be great art or scientific advances. It could be a powerful military capable of world dominance, or a happy population which attracts the lost and hopeless from around the world. There are all sorts of purposes to a nation, and all sorts of governance schemes to make those purposes happen. But what if all you want is to make money? That's the role of a CEO, to make money. Where money is made, prosperity follows, and ultimately, prosperity, as loose of a term as it may be, is the goal of any righteous government. Therefore, why not
just make money?
Those are the thoughts of a shadowy group of CEOs who will soon rise to power in an America plagued by debates about slavery and Western expansion. In a nation full of divided interests, it's up to the CEOs to find someone that will best serve their interests, who they can uplift as the head of the United Scientific Associations, a movement centered on the advancement of the economy at any cost, unless the cost is money. In today's video, I'll be using the positivist movement to create a nation absolutely dominated by the interests of money and its unending acquisition. The United States in 1836 is a nation beset by inner turmoil around two issues: slavery and westwards expansion. These two things are inherently connected to money, of course. Slavery is about labor costs. Westward expansion is about expanding into new markets. Now, there are all sorts of alternate points to be made in the Senate and the House about these issues, like the morality of dehumanizing slaves or the imperative to spread American values to the lawless West. These arguments decenter the money, which is why, among the richest of America, there's an ever-increasing sense that the government is a failure of an institution. That being said, the government has a will of its own, and this American government is one motivated strongly by the idea of an America with a powerful overseas presence, and that presence begins with the Panama Canal. I also just wanted to highlight how funny looking this angel with two eagles is. I just wish we could get a closer look at the statues for power blocks, because some of them are interesting or funny looking, and I don't want to have to squint for it. Also, check out this frankly insulting offer from the British: a meager quantity of clothes in return for trade privileges and investment rights. Brother, who would accept this? That's insane. Anyway, the invasion of Granada is going quite well, as we have reached Cundinamarca with ease. But things back home aren't looking as good. Unfortunately, the army's choice to leave America has given the proponents of slavery some ideas. They're threatening a civil war over the right to prevent a federal police force. Right now, slavery is an institution which is tolerated but limited in America, meaning that plantation owners cannot ship in any new slaves, but may keep their current ones as well as the children they may produce. The slavers want more though. They want fresh blood, which they often do acquire illegally. A federal police force might make that harder. This blatant threat to upend the nation would see a huge electoral turnout among Northerners in the 1836 election, which would see Daniel Webster come to power as the new president to replace Andrew Jackson. Oh hey, backing off the roleplay for a minute, if you ever are playing America and want an alliance but find that the great powers aren't willing to do it, just make an army with 200 conscripts and never mobilize it. The AI thinks you actually have a massive army if you do this, so you can get an alliance with Britain pretty easily. The Reading Protocol is a 25-year alliance with Britain, which the federal government has signed with the intent of demonstrating to the southern planters that, should warfare break out, there may be more to contend with than just some Minutemen. Of course, it would be through the subtle influence of the money holders in America that a little trade privilege agreement would be tossed into this seemingly strictly military alliance. Already has money gotten into the government. Nonetheless, this new anti-slavery government is one with continued interests overseas. Venezuela will be the next nation to join the American empire. At the same time, the first major company the United States came to be. Lee Wilson and Company was founded with the blessing of the government as a counter to Southern interests. The planters ran small, homegrown, one might say, cotton plantations, which provided much of the funding for their political interests. Instead, Lee Wilson and Company, which I will later remember to rename after a channel member, will take over the many Southern cotton plantations with no interest in politics, only money. To the government's eyes, a CEO will, likely, be more willing to let go of slavery than the planters who have almost a cultural connection to slavery in their land. Speaking of renaming, I did indeed name this company after Sulfy, creating Sulfy's All-American Cotton. Now, they produce a little more than just cotton, but most of their profits will be from the highly lucrative cotton trade. Conveniently for my story, I checked the CEO's ideology, and Gregory Garrett is an abolitionist, so that just makes the idea of a government-sponsored cotton company to counteract slavery even more fitting. One thing I'll say here about executives, since I've started making it a regular thing to talk about mechanics in these videos, is that I wish we could pick from like a list of 3 executives to run a company. Making it totally random is okay, I guess, but at least getting 3 random choices to pick from would be nice. Oh, also, a check mark somewhere that shows if the company has a historical founder and what years you'd have to found the company in order to get the historical founder. Just a little UX thing that'd be really nice, I think. Anyway, I'm passing laissez-faire now, which I know is what we do every game, but the reason why I do it is because it makes the game much more fun to play for me. By giving 75% of the construction to the private sector, I can make a lot more construction which can make use of the investment pool, compared to having to stop and start construction so that I could have enough sectors to use the investment pool without bankrupting. What I will do, to justify this laissez-faire law, is say that we're already making a shadowy world of CEOs which run the government, and of course, they'd want laissez-faire implemented as soon as possible. In July of 1842, I got started on a bunch of universities, which will of course be dedicated to figuring out innovative new production methods for the nation's industry. Anyway, it's time to attack Mexico and reach the west coast. I'd say more about this war, but of course my army will destroy Mexico, and for good measure, I called in Britain as an ally. What was interesting during this war was a meeting between the CEO of Sulphy's All-American Cotton and a newly arrived Brazilian immigrant, Diogo Antonio Feijó. Diogo here historically was the regent of Brazil and head of the Brazilian Senate for a while. He was a liberal that was ousted by the conservative government at the time and found himself standing trial, after which he successfully defended himself, and shortly after which he died of natural causes. In this world, Senor Feijó will move to America and discuss his positivist ideals with the rising power of America. Through Feijó's influence, the idea of an atheist republic ruled by a council of wise men would grip the upper echelons of American society. Positivist ideals have entered America, unbeknownst to the common man, and soon they will permeate the entire society. Near the end of the Mexican-American War, massive strikes from the workers of America slowed business down, as they saw this new laissez-faire economic model proposed by the government to be something which would reduce regulation and harm the lives of the working man, whose life was already hard enough. This went exactly to Senor Feijó's plan, which was to pin the blame on the government for the people's hardships, so as to secure the support of the people. The Mexican-American War came to an end, and then the army returned to DC to quell the strikes. The violence intensified, and out of protest, President Vanderbilt signed the laissez-faire law into power. As he signed the new bill, protesters broke into the White House, among them was Feijó, and at the threat of death, President Cornelius Vanderbilt resigned from office, and a temporary government to be run by the CEO of Sulphy's All-American Cotton, Gregory Garnett, was installed. President Garnett gave an address to the people, where he cited the failures of the government to maintain civil order and facilitate normal business. He wrote the following speech, named the Freedom Address. This union of states, as it is in this world, is one founded at the behest of a people whose economic whims were once restricted. When our forefathers dumped British tea into the sea, it was because the British found it their prerogative to put upon us a vice intended to squeeze prosperity out from us. They saw in themselves a better, which they had no right to claim. The government which we have just toppled is one which believed itself superior to any other, for no reason beyond its ability to win a glorified popularity contest. The world changes, and with it must we change. No longer will your ability to live in prosperity be hindered by anything, for I will run this government not to govern you, but to govern those who might claim to be governors. No man may govern any other man, but man will govern the world around him, and every man has his own world. Today, I grant you a world with no governor but yourself. Famously, before ending the speech, he paused and added, "This I speak to every American. To you will be granted a world of your own." And this was clearly understood to be in reference to President Garnett's well-known abolitionist stance. He intends to imply that the slaves will go free, at least according to the rather paranoid slave owners of America, who get a feeling their time is at an end. For his work in helping President Garnett come to power, Diogo Feijó was given the position of vice president, and together the two worked on establishing the American technocracy. What this had the unfortunate side effect of doing was essentially create a new faction of rebels of the nation who saw through the Freedom Address and noted that in the supposed world where a man governed his own world, there would be some men's worlds who would become so big that others would have to shrink. In essence, voting rights actually did help equalize the American world, but to spark a civil war was a big step, and one which the relatively small pro-suffrage movement wouldn't have the resources to fight. It seems the Freedom Address had done its job, and tantalized the American people with an image of ungovernable independence, and so, without a single shot fired, the United Scientific Associations was born, to replace the government of failure which preceded it. Before we get into that though, we have to talk about the future, which these CEOs could never have envisioned. A world of war with machines of steel. This video is sponsored by War Thunder, the most comprehensive vehicle combat game ever. It's available now for PC, PlayStation, Xbox, and mobile, all for free. It's got over 2,500 tanks, planes, helicopters, and ships from 10 major nations. They span the tech tree from biplanes and armored cars of the interwar period to advanced fighter jets and main battle tanks in use today. These are complex beasts of machinery, and War Thunder has your back with regards to the experience you want to have. If you want simplicity, check out arcade mode for more gamey physics and a fast pace. Alternatively, you can play simulator mode for a slow, challenging experience, or strike a balance with realistic mode. Best of all, you can play any mode using a mouse and keyboard. No need for any expensive peripherals like flight sticks or whatever. War Thunder is an immersive experience where you get to really feel like you're in command of a powerful fighting machine, all thanks to the incredibly detailed vehicles, graphics, and sound effects, which give the game a realistic, grounded feel. The game is available on PC and consoles, but if you've got an itch to scratch for some military action, you can even play War Thunder on your phone. It uses all the same beautiful, massive multiplayer PvP battles and an intuitive control scheme to keep you focused on the action. In War Thunder, vehicles are more than metal machines with HP and stats. Each part of the vehicle is simulated down to its individual components, and enemy fire can damage or disable those components with consequences for the vehicle and your ability to operate it. The best part is you can see the carnage yourself thanks to the X-ray view, making even losing fun. Join a worldwide community of over 95 million players in huge player vs player battles today, and get started or return to the breathtaking experience that is War Thunder. There's a simply unmatched breadth of content available with War Thunder, and there's no better game suited to those who love military history. When you use the links in the description or pinned comment, new players and returning players who haven't played for 6 months will get a massive bonus pack that includes premium vehicles, 100,000 silver lions, and 7 days of premium account. It's a limited offer, so be quick. Anyway, back to the video. The Garnet Feijoo government is one with near totally unified interests. However, they did accede to one demand from the rebels. It's quite clear that civil war is imminent without some kind of compromise, and it would be bad for business to have war, so Garnet and Feijoo got to work on implementing public health care. At the very least, the people need security that they won't end up dead from an accident, or that if some larger world should intersect with theirs, they can at least lick their wounds and live to fight another day. The promise to establish a public healthcare system would bring America back to peace and allow the nation to continue its economic development, which it did. I've been focused so far in this video on passing laws and the like, but in terms of buildings, it's a very standard American build. Lots of iron, coal, and steel, which will prop up the construction sector, at which point the investment pool handles most of the building for actually profitable goods. One fun aspect of laissez-faire is simply not having to do anything, as the name implies. As long as you keep the cost of construction low, your economy will build itself. Now, the AI that controls investment isn't the best, but it's good enough to make a more or less competent economy, which will see your investment pool put to use. I passed public healthcare in September of 1847, but it was while I was holding escape to get through the bajillion notifications of all of Britain's subjects joining the war against the uprisings in India, so it disappeared before I could show it off. I built up some bureaucracy to level up my healthcare, and then invaded Peru-Bolivia, who very kindly backed down in February of 1848. Chile did the same thing in April that year, which was really nice. These South Americans are saving me time and money by just surrendering. For my power block, I'm going for advanced research, and it's obviously because we're going for this whole technocracy scientific association vibe here, but it's also because I really like to play with late game technology, and yet I so rarely get to. I'm going to use this playthrough as a way to fulfill that desire of mine. I wanted to show off this really clean looking British Raj, by the way. I guess so many princely states rose up in rebellion and got annexed that there are nearly none left, and thus we are left with this very well united Raj in April of 1849. Let's get back to America, where the slavery debate has returned to the forefront of politics. The nation got a little distracted with the whole bloodless revolution and new presidency for life system. Garnet is an abolitionist through and through, although for different reasons than some of the others. Where he and Feijoo can agree is that as technology advances and the skills required to operate the machines which that technology brings become more and more relevant, slaves will fall out of usage. Right now, the cost of housing and feeding a slave is lower than the operating costs of a machine, but that will not remain the same forever. Thus, slavery must be banned to prepare the future industrialists of America for a technological revolution. Although the planters are threatening war over this new law, Sulphy's All-American Cotton, President Garnet's company, don't worry about the obvious conflict of interest there by the way, has slowly bought up most of the southern cotton, which would otherwise fund a potential war. Nonetheless, the rebels do pose a threat of disrupting business. The Garnet Feijoo government will call them on their bluff and push the law anyway, while beginning the Panama Canal project. The Panama Canal is super useful in Victoria 3 as it gives access to the Panama Canal Company, which gives a flat $50,000 income for the budget and trade advantage across the entire nation's trade centers. That and the more obvious benefit of being able to move ships and soldiers through the canal. Speaking of canals, there's another one in Egypt I went for, also for the company. There's a problem with the Suez Canal for many nations though, and that's actually getting it employed. In most cases, you'll discriminate the local Middle Easterners. They're too heavy for them to be able to work in the canal, and you can't make the company unless you have enough employees in the canal. I was kind of hoping to make Egypt a protectorate, but they backed down to my demand for Suez, and I didn't want the infamy for making the protectorate a primary war goal, so I let it go. In December of 1851, I banned slavery, which would prove the final straw for the Southern planters, but representatives of the Southern secessionist movement were swayed by a wink and a nudge from President Garnett. He said that in return for banning slavery, he'd abolish federal policing, and simultaneously mentioned how difficult it would be to enforce the new ban on slavery. It seemed that the morals of this abolitionist president could easily be swayed, and so the slavers went home and put away their rebellious sentiment. Their demobilization would prove their end though, as in the brief time that this new abolition of the federal police would be drafted, the existing federal police went about auditing previously slave-owning plantations. Before they could reassemble, the police had captured the heads of the revolution, and whatever fake plans President Garnett had written up were thrown into a fire. Garnett and Fayjou shared a drink, knowing that they'd solved the slavery debate, a debate which the previous government nearly plunged the nation into war over. Okay, that works nicely for the story, but actually the slave revolt did pop up just one more time, so I faked passing debt slavery just for a second, and then when I cancelled that one, the slavery movement's support was low enough that they could no longer become insurrectionary. It just works better for the story with the fake policing bill. Anyway, as of January of 1853, Fayjou has retired from politics to be replaced by some market liberal intelligentsia guy, and in his place, President Garnett appointed Abraham Lincoln as vice president. For reference here, I'm just using the second largest interest group as vice president, but in reality, there's no such thing as vice president in Victoria III. VP Lincoln helped to negotiate the Oregon Treaty with Britain, which saw the Pacific Northwest enter the United States, and with that, we have almost a complete America. We still have to fill in a few dots of native land, at which point we will be whole. I checked in on Salfie's Cotton Company to see how they're doing, and we can see profits steadily rising and a portfolio full of assets across the British Empire and America. The British are an excellent nation in whom to invest, and the profits from our industries there will feed the investment machine. The Panama Canal completed construction in June of 1854, and that means I've gotten it done about 60 years before reality. It also means I could finally make my second company, the Panama Canal Company, which I've renamed to the Charles Burke Panama America Society after one of my channel members. Don't forget to become a member if you want to see your name in the videos, folks. Getting the canal company to be prosperous can be tough since ports don't tend to generate huge profits, but in good time, I'll either use subventions to sell merchant marine overseas, or I'll just let my market eventually grow to the point that the company can gain prosperity. Shortly after, I got to work on the Suez Canal, although both its construction and the process of getting it to be staffed will be very difficult. Just after signing off on the construction of the canal, President Garnett suddenly passed away. He was in his 50s, but perhaps he'd simply overworked himself. He was mourned as the founder of a new, better America, and was replaced by a student of the retired Diogo Fayjou, Gordon McCune, the CEO of the Panama Canal Company. President McCune is similar in skill to President Garnett, but he is more ideologically aligned with Vice President Fayjou, as a positivist. President McCune chose to keep Abraham Lincoln on as vice president, and I know technically that when a president dies, the vice president becomes president, but let's just say that rule was changed when the nation adopted a president for life system. Anyway, I'm going to make a random Bulgaria that got released recently into a protectorate because I can. There's not really anything of particular note there, but it's just a nice spot, I guess. This war had the potential to really heat up, as Russia supported Bulgaria and Britain supported me, but it ended anticlimactically when Bulgaria simply backed down in February of 1855. In June of 1857, the Charles Burke Panama America Society reached prosperity, meaning a bunch of money and a new company slot. The immediate, obvious pick, of course, is Carnegie Steel. You can never go wrong with this amazing company. For this company, the executive is Asa Craig, a feminist southerner. Now remember, this guy is not some crusader for women's rights because he's like a simp or something. No, with the increase of machines doing the labor of industry, it's becoming more and more viable to put women into the workforce, and that's what he wants. That being said, the compliant trait isn't doing him any favors with regards to the simp allegations. I renamed this company to Nezuko Carbon Steel Corp, after another one of our beloved channel members. With each new executive, the board of executives expands, as these companies are basically the top industries which will make the decisions for the nation. So far, we have a few interests bubbling up. Their current president is Gordon McCune, the CEO of Charles Burke Panama America Society. He's a positivist, and his goal is to abolish Sundays as a weekend. For that, he will make America an atheist state. That would mean one more day in the week to make money. In charge of Salpy's All-American Cotton is Barnabas Frelinghuysen, who is a moderate. He's just looking to keep business steady, but is the main force behind the upcoming colonial exploitation law, which the council is working on. In charge of Nezuko's Carbon Steel is Asa Craig, who is the founder you mentioned before. We know his motivations already. These three CEOs are the beginning of a soon-to-expand executive board that will drive the United Scientific Associations to new heights. In today's world, when we talk about liberals, we often associate them with what is properly known as progressivism. To fight for the rights of minorities and to create a society which better serves the disadvantaged, those are progressive ideals, which are often called liberal now. The liberalism of the Victorian era is very different, albeit as a side effect can have similar outcomes as progressivism. Liberals are capitalists, they are moneymakers, and the reason they support things like voting rights or the abolition of serfdom and slavery is the positive effect these things have on free enterprise. We've seen that demonstrated with President McCune's hope to abolish Sundays, and with Asa Craig's mission to secure women the right to work. What you're about to see over the next couple decades is an America which will become so radically progressive that it would make today's world look downright draconian in comparison. By May of 1858, I'm mostly building up steel and tools, and I'm also working on some consumer goods like clothes and furniture. Interestingly enough, more standard living isn't necessarily all that great for me as America, since my migration attraction is high enough that I'll probably already be getting like 90% of the mass migrations in the game. More SOL just means a lower birth rate. It does also mean more consumption, but I can still produce other industrial goods and resource industries to keep building really. We're going to try and de-peasant the nation, attract more migrants, and just keep the economy going. Right now I have lots of spare labor to work with, but in good time, I'll start running out of pops. Then I'll be where we use labor-saving production methods and start really skyrocketing the standard of living, but we'll get there when we do. For now, it's time to invade Argentina. Brazil decided to protect them, and in memory of Diogo Feijó, who was poorly treated by the Brazilian government, I'll be dismantling their nation. I say in memory of Diogo, but of course, our capitalist board of CEOs simply sees an opportunity to secure Brazil's market if it can split the nation and eat up the pieces. Of course, President McCune, the protege of Senor Feijó, can't help but feel a little catharsis at destroying the home of the men that treated his teachers so poorly, but that's a side thing. Along the way to the war's escalation, a new CEO joined the board. This is Yankees Fan Manufacturing Incorporated, run by Asa Worthington, the first on the board to be from the intelligentsia. He's a market liberal, making him, in essence, a moderate industrialist. Once the war began, I focused on Brazil first before Argentina. I'm going to try and fight through the Amazon while also invading Rio de Janeiro navally. The invasion went poorly at first, but I've pulled most of the Brazilian army to the front in the Amazon now, and now that they're over there, it'll take them too long to get back to Rio de Janeiro to stop my invading soldiers. I made a successful landing, unopposed, in February of 1860, and now it'll just take some time for Brazil to surrender. Argentina did sneakily land in DC while that was happening, which was a surprise for sure, but they'll be easily removed. Brazil capitulated in August that year while I was landing in Buenos Aires. After the war ended, I checked in on the Suez Canal, and we could see that although its construction is complete, it can't hire anyone since they're too discriminated. To be clear, this is not a qualifications issue. A decree won't fix this. It's that overly discriminated pops can't work in government buildings. This is a problem for the executives of America, who want that canal up and running as soon as possible. Despite that setback, President McCune secured investment rights with France in October 1861, opening up yet another massive market to invest in. For the mere cost of just over £9,000 per week, the French will grant investment rights and trade privileges, which is great. Sending money is an excellent way to get treaties to work because as you get larger and larger of a budget and GDP, each pound is less and less valuable, but they still give acceptance on the treaty at a similar level across the game. I made a similar deal with Britain about a week later. All of my companies have investment rights, so the regional HQs will start pumping funds back home. I piggybacked onto a British war around this time against Qing. My goal is to open their market. See, Britain is surprisingly willing to accept my help in return for more or less destroying the advantage their treaty port gives them. By being the only nation, besides Portugal, with a treaty port, Britain gets a lot of trade advantage because they've got one of only 2 ports in the entire Qing market. By opening Qing's market, they'll be allowed to make trade centers across their whole nation and compete with the treaty ports. The treaty ports still give bonus trade advantage, so they're not useless, but they won't be quite as good without the monopoly on Chinese trade. I'm starting my colonization of Central Africa around this time as well, since I'll be getting malaria prevention pretty soon. Thanks to my huge university spamming and advanced research power block, I can get ahead of the curve pretty well. Speaking of power block, I added freedom of movement for my last principle, which I'm going to hope will get me even more immigrants than I'm already getting. In preparation for my colonization of Africa, I attacked Portugal to get control of Angola and Mozambique, which would let me colonize many states all at once. The Portuguese did resist, but they had no support from any great powers, so I simply invaded Lisbon and easily won the war. After that war, with the possibility of a significant plantation economy coming to mind for the nation, another CEO joined the board. Nicholas Cameron, a moderate industrialist, is running Gannon Patent Bananas Limited, a company all about fruit and sugar. I learned in this playthrough by using this company that fruit can actually be quite profitable, and also the 20% plantation throughput modifier from the prosperity bonus is kind of insane, although the infamy decay is painful. Personally, I really like prosperity bonuses that have ups and downs, so here's hoping there'll be more of that in the future. In 1865, Abraham Lincoln announced his retirement from politics. He was replaced by a market liberal, which fit right in with the whole board of CEOs. However, President McCune chose a new vice president anyway. He brought in a member of the intelligentsia at the request of Asa Worthington, the market liberal intelligentsia CEO from earlier. This new vice president is a humanist, and I mentioned earlier that liberalization often goes hand in hand with progressivism. We're about to see that demonstrated as a bill to give equal rights to all people in the nation began. With multiculturalism, the number of potential workers for the nation will immensely expand, although it will be a hard sell to the highly racialized American culture. Nonetheless, the Board of Executives is a powerful entity which should be able to make it happen. Looking at the economy, I made a big step for the nation in October of 1865. I swapped over to steel construction, which will create demand for entirely new industries. Glass, explosives, steel, and tools will become the new titans of industry instead of old iron from before. I unlocked Zeppelins in April of 1867, which is wonderful because it gives a market access price impact bonus, MAPI for short. With bonus MAPI, every good I make will sell for a better price, and my economy will essentially be streamlined, creating greater profits across the board. Speaking of profits, as of October that year, all my companies have over £100,000 in profit, with my most profitable one being Nezuko Carbon Steel Corp, which has over £500,000 in profit. Truly wonderful. I'm going to expand my construction a bunch to celebrate. I'm also going to celebrate with the passing of multiculturalism in just 1867. That is, in my opinion, quite early, although earlier is of course possible. My next law will be guaranteed liberties, which again is to be pursued in the interest of keeping business smooth. Consumers will not consume if they have no guarantees of safety, and the producers won't produce if they can't find people to consume. Cool thing, in January 1869 by the way, the French traded me Lindy for Lorenzo Marques, which made for some honestly kind of awkward borders, but it also kind of worked in some ways. I checked in on the board of executives and their companies in August that year, and saw just an immense amount of money in each of them. There's prosperity across the board, although Yankees Fan Manufacturing Incorporated is just slightly below 100 prosperity. It was around this time that President McCune finally got to work on the abolition of Sundays and holidays for the workers. It's time for American state atheism, wherein the only idol of American culture is money. This will be the land of profit. This will be the land of prosperity. From here, there'll be lots of fighting with natives in Africa to get colonization rights. I'm also getting some solid technology. I'm working on corporate governance in December of 1870, but I'm not sure which company I want next. I of course want Ford, because cars are insanely good, but that'll be some time before I can get the tech for that company. For now, I think I'll later use that slot for the Suez Canal Company. The board passed state atheism in May of 1871, abolishing all national holidays and leaving only Saturday as a day for relaxation for the workers. One break a week was found to be optimal for maintaining worker efficiency in some small-scale tests performed by the board. The more controversial law among the board members was the implementation of mandatory public school for kids. Some on the board believed that better education would create more productive workers who could ultimately work the more advanced machines that will one day exist, while other board members believed that machines wouldn't require further education to use. The former philosophy won out, thus leading to an American school curriculum. It'll take a few years to pass, and in that time, I attacked the Confederation of the Equator and founded the Suez Canal Company run by its historical founder, Ferdinand de Lesseps, and renamed to Lalaloopsy's American Suez Corporation, after yet another one of our wonderful channel members. The curriculum was established in September of 1873, and with that, the land of profit has truly been born. By April of 1874, we have all the laws we could want, and we've got over £250 million of GDP, with a slightly positive budget to boot. I won't lie to you, this is probably my most successful run in over a year in terms of laws, GDP, and everything. What will ensue is a game where I essentially just keep building up the GDP and employ every American I can. However, that wouldn't be as interesting of a story. So how about we turn up the heat? The Board of Executives, now composed of Barnabas Frelinghuysen of Sulfy's All-American Cotton, Asa Craig of Nezuko Carbon Steel Corp., President McCune of the Charles Burke Panama America Society, Asa Worthington of Yankees Fan Manufacturing Incorporated, Nicholas Cameron of Gannon Patent Bananas Limited, and finally, Ferdinand de Lesseps of Lalaloopsy's American Suez Corporation, has achieved total dominance of the American nation. They have successfully created a nation that, since President Garnett and Vice President Fayou's coup in 1844, has seen tremendous growth economically, socially, politically, and diplomatically. The nation has united itself around the purpose of industry, as we can see with over 50% of the nation's political clout being behind the industrialists in December of 1874. What we've seen since the coup has been a genuine golden era of America. There has been neither military nor economic anxiety which could rock the continuous rise in power emblematic of the past 30 years. However, without as much fervor to pursue greatness, the United Scientific Associations is faced with a need to find a new purpose, and unfortunately, their total dedication to money might soon push them into oblivion. Reaching over 300 million pounds of GDP in March of 1875, the board approved a massive increase in construction, believing that whatever costs the new construction might bring to the treasury would be worthwhile compared to the potential peril of an over-leveraged nation. This agreement has always been part of the technocratic system of executives, as some believed children should work, others not. Some had no faith in the need for education, and some weren't sure that non-whites could work in the factories at the same level as the whites, and yet, through debate, greater truth is always uncovered, and with that in mind, the board knew that they were always fighting for a greater outcome. Now is the time for every CEO to get what belongs to them, damn the consequences. We are entering an era of exploitation, and the target is America. So what does that mean in Victoria 3, to exploit the nation? Well, let's consider each CEO and their respective company to be their own entity, and the nation of America to be a separate one. The nation prospers when standard of living increases, when the budget is balanced, and when the nation gains prestige. The company prospers when their profits increase. Now, there's a very mutualistic relationship here. As the companies profit, they make jobs, that increases the standard of living, and when the standard of living goes up, the company has more people to sell things to, everyone pays some taxes, and the taxes let the nation run colonial enterprises and overseas conquests to create new markets. What happens when the companies decide they just want profits, damn the future consequences? Well, we get the beginnings of an untenable deficit. President McCune is more loyal to the board than to the nation, really. So every time a CEO approaches him asking for a subvention or a subsidy which would pull from the government treasury, he grants it. This CEO needs more construction sectors go up to the government's expense. In December of 1876, we got over 4,000 construction points and nearly £500 million of deficit. Given how massive the economy is, it's unlikely America will face a bankruptcy anytime soon, but for the CEOs of America here, all this debt is owed by the government treasury, not by the shareholders. This is essentially just free money. It's beautiful. In July of the next year, the Suez Company finally reached prosperity, meaning a new company can be founded. A new member of the board will join, but who? Well, by now I really want Ford, but I need the research for it, so hold tight while we get onto the immense profit that is the automobile industry. I haven't shown this yet, but check out the global company profits list as of July of 1877. We can see Nezuko Steel on top, but Britain's East India Company is in a close second. All of my companies are in the upper echelons, but other great powers have some pretty okay companies themselves. Around December that year, we can see I've got 400 million GDP, but also, check out that atheist conversion. It's truly beautiful, isn't it? This America with no religion but the dollar. It's time for feminism to take hold in America, as the CEO Asa Craig has finally summoned up the will to ask President McCune to make it happen. We can't get women's suffrage, since we have no suffrage in general, but we can at least get women in the workplace. By April of 1879, we've begun research on the combustion engine, which will soon revolutionize American society. Something I wish Technocracy did was actually give some kind of research bonus, but Technocracy is interesting in Victoria 3. Allow me, if you will, to talk about game mechanics for a moment. Technocracy is just autocracy, but with bonus clout for different pops in comparison. I think Vic 3 does this a little too often, with the slight modifiers to numbers instead of actually providing some new things to do. A technocracy, it feels like, should be run fundamentally differently than an autocracy, and yet the two are in essence the exact same thing. Were I to be on autocracy in this scenario, we might simply see a drop in industrialist clout and a rise in landowner clout, and we'd have a little more authority, and that's about all. I don't have an immediate answer for what the special sauce in Technocracy should be, but I'm more just saying that it's missing the special sauce. Anyway, mechanics aside, in December of 1879, I got Joshua Norton, who normally is amazing because he likes to get multiculturalism with his enlightened monarch ideology, but we already have multiculturalism, so his usefulness is moot. I unlocked women in the workplace in February of 1880, which will help fix the fact that I am indeed starting to run out of workers in my best states. I also renamed the block afterward to something more appropriate for the world I'm building. The American destiny has been manifested by now, so it's time to create Rapture. Yes, obvious Bioshock reference is obvious, but I like to think that the same sort of confidence that brought down the libertarians of Rapture is beginning to infest the board of America. I attacked Qing shortly after, looking to conquer Suzhou and Nanjing simply for the workers in arable land. I'm hoping that I can plant a bunch of crops in China, ruining the subsistence farms and forcing these Han people into unemployment, so they'll come make cultural communities off in America and populate my nation. I'm going to get Britain to mostly win this war for me, as I've called them in by transferring Gabon. The loss of Gabon is nothing compared to the gain of these Chinese states. I finally unlocked the combustion engine during the Qing War in 1881, and with it, I will shoot the GDP to new heights. The thing is, the board needs more. This explosive engine is a marvel of science, but its applications could extend far beyond moving a metal machine to and fro. Instead, work on an engine making use of compression ignition would begin. This is obviously extremely far ahead of time, but thanks to our Power Block's advanced research and the absolute ton of universities I've got, it'll only take about 8 years to research. I'm researching compression ignition before I even have electrical generation, meaning America will be using oil to power huge engines for mining before they even know how to turn on a light bulb. I was going to make the Ford company right away, but I made the mistake of thinking it wanted automobile industries in Michigan. It wants motor industries there, so there will be a slight delay. I ended up completing the war with Qing before then, conquering some nice states in China and immediately getting to work on incorporating them and getting their arable land to use. After that, I did found Ford Motors, headed up by the protectionist Lawrence Crowninshield. He's inept, likely on account of his protectionism. I swear, you can't make this stuff up, man. I ended up renaming Ford to a later date, simply because I was rapidly running out of members after whom to name companies. Don't forget to become a member, sorry for saying it so often, I just need more names for companies. Anyway, here's the culture demographics of America as of November of 1883. We can see that the Yankees and Dixies clearly dominate as expected, but certain states have become refuges for otherwise down on their luck cultures, like the Sindhis of Montana and the Armenians of Arizona. Swedish Utah is definitely sending me though, I won't lie. A further consequence of this lack of Yankification of certain states is an interesting religion map mode. Atheism has taken over America for sure, but in the remote mountains of Montana, we do see a vibrant Muslim community, and in Arizona, an Armenian Christian community. In terms of why atheism isn't spreading there much, I believe it's because we've got a continuous source of Muslims and Oriental Orthodox Christians to make up the losses to conversion we'd otherwise be seeing. Eventually, atheism will take over, but it may be a long time. The greed of our little board of CEOs is starting to get more and more visible as America approaches her debt cap in 1885. With a deficit well over £1 million a week, the CEOs are putting the nation's treasury directly into their bank accounts with the help of subsidies and tariffs. Among those that are worried about the deficit, there's an almost cult-like worship of the compression ignition engine and its ability to generate income that is keeping their worries assuaged. So long as the nation can avert bankruptcy for 3 more years, this new technology will launch the nation into the stratosphere. Of course, the more realistic among them are starting to see that perhaps the short-term pursuit of profits will begin to tear the nation asunder if they don't change course. The budget would indeed hold out until the new technology was ready for mass distribution, and just as the GDP started to plateau around £750 million too, it's time for the Magnates of Greed to put to the test their faith in this new machine. To give you a taste of how insane this production method is, I set all my automobiles and mines to use the new PM, and within 2 weeks, I gained over 100 million GDP, just like that. I then hit £1 billion just after Christmas of 1888, meaning I've gotten over £1 billion of GDP before 1900. Very cool, very awesome. The thing is, the deficit is still insane, and the nation is still on the way to bankruptcy in due time. Something must change, and the board will have a meeting to discuss the fate of their stranglehold on America. President McCune is staunchly in support of continuing to extract from the nation what profits they can until an inevitable bankruptcy hits, at which point he intends to take his literal billions of dollars and go live in Britain somewhere on an estate. Some of the other CEOs appreciate that position, but some of them don't want to leave the United States, which they assume will be in collapse as a result of a federal bankruptcy. The board argued immensely over this issue, and President McCune faced an immense backlash if he couldn't appease the Budgetarians, the faction of CEOs that wished to fix the budget. He appointed a very special man to be his new vice president as a show of goodwill to the Budgetarians. In May of 1889, Theodore Roosevelt entered the White House, a man of wealth, but not the ungodly hoard of wealth that the board held. He was a fiery reformer with everything Americans valued in his heart. Roosevelt, as a vice president, would serve as an advisor to President McCune with regards to serving the nation. Roosevelt's influence in the government was rather minimal, but his influence on the hearts and minds of the board were much greater. Those who fell into his school of thoughts would become Budgetarians, and those who supported McCune would form the Profiteers faction. Time will tell which side wins out. So the obvious thing here is that in Victoria 3, I'm not actually playing as the CEOs, I am playing as the nation in general. So naturally, I don't want to just ruin my nation. Therefore, you'd think the Budgetarians just win. But what this ideological debate is really about is whether or not to pay off the debt, or just grow the debt cap faster than the debt itself. It's a common technique in Victoria 3 to continuously operate at a deficit and simply grow your GDP and therefore debt cap faster than the interest payments pile up. Debt is only bad if it results in bankruptcy in Victoria 3, and especially with a laissez-faire economic system, it's very easy to keep costs down. In terms of gameplay here, it would actually be extremely easy to fix my budgetary concerns by just raising taxes, and that would be the correct move here. Raising taxes is no big deal when your SOL is this high. I've got lots of loyalists and I've got a large consumer economy by now which can keep SOL high despite the taxes. The problem is that with a consumer economy like mine, higher taxes will reduce SOL and thus reduce consumption, which in turn reduces GDP. This is the sort of loop of late game taxes. By this point in the game, taxes are bad not because they generate radicals, although they do that, but rather because they negatively impact the economy. Nonetheless, I can just keep taxes up, pay off the debt and call it a day, and President McEwen accepted that idea. Vice President Roosevelt was also happy with the choice to follow the Budgetarian way, but he's not exactly happy with his beloved nation's fall into the hands of some greedy industrialists. Roosevelt was famously a man for the people, and he's got a plan. You may have noticed the brewing revolution from the large Confucian Chinese population of America. As unorthodox as it may sound, Roosevelt had a shared goal with these Chinese cultists, and that's the pursuit of an America that is no longer ruled by a cult of money. To fight money, Roosevelt will need money, so he ordered the construction of some 500 textile mills in New York, and I want to quickly say that this is entirely just me making up lore. With laissez-faire, all government dividends go straight to the investment pool, but I like to imagine Roosevelt is claiming this money for the American Treasury in preparation for the dethroning of the CEOs. Another gameplay aspect I wanted to highlight is my world market presence. Over half of all world market goods are American, and I'm also the largest importer in the world, but only by a small margin compared to my export share. Check out this trade center with nearly £1 million in profit. Just ignore that a large portion of that profit is from subventions. It's kind of amazing I'm having a Confucianist rebellion at all looking at my religion map mode. We still see that Muslim Montana and Christian Arizona going strong, but I guess the Confucianists are upset because they don't have a state to call home like the Muslims and Christians do. I like to imagine Montana and Arizona are like wacky alternate world versions of Utah here, this strange religious state with its own customs just kind of hanging out. In September of 1891, I got the macroeconomics tech, which is amazing because it gives more mappy and it gives another company slot. I'm going to spend this company slot, my last one, on a very important and final member of the board of executives. I founded Standard Oil, run by John Rockefeller, and I actually won't be renaming Standard Oil or Ford Motors because I just got so wrapped up in my play that I forgot to. It's my bad, sorry, at least the other companies got names, right? Now, Mr. Rockefeller is very special in this story because he's actually working with Roosevelt to end the rule of the CEOs in America. Rockefeller would prefer that the pressure of governance stay in the hands of the government. As to him, business is business. He's essentially an old guard capitalist whose sole focus is money instead of this strange dominance over the nation. After all, these massive companies are hard to compete with, and the market could use a good rattle, in the words of Mr. Rockefeller. Roosevelt and Rockefeller became good friends and worked with the Chinese Confucianists to slowly undermine the technocracy. In case you're wondering about the gameplay choice of using Standard Oil, it's literally just because I need more oil. Because I'm actually using these endgame production methods, oil is in huge demand, and the throughput that Standard Oil will give me means more oil for the market. Life continued as normal, with President McEwen's budgetarian compromise running smoothly. The government is escaping debt, the economy is still growing, and with it the company profits, and the people's standard of living is also rising. President McEwen is even becoming complacent, some are saying. He was once a firebrand of ideology thanks to Diogo Feijo's mentorship, but it looks like the past couple decades of rulership have had their toll on the president. Check out this culture map in January of 1893, by the way. I'm kind of impressed by the little pockets of diversity, and of course the Han of South Carolina fit my story nicely. South Carolina, you might say, is the hotbed of the Confucian rights movement. Ecuadorian Oklahoma is a vibe for sure, and Swedish Utah, boxing in Dixie, Nevada with Armenian Arizona is certainly up there in the vibe rankings. I'm running into a funny problem by this point in the game, and that's that my companies are just too good. I'm generating so much profit and so much investment, but I can't possibly make use of it. I'm paying off debt right now, that's true, but even if I weren't, more construction will simply make too many buildings for how little population I have left. I'm at the point in the game now, given my laws and military power, that I should be conquering high population states just for workers. We're getting a ton of migration, that's for sure, but no amount of migration can fill in the buildings as quickly as we're getting them down with over 7,000 construction points. In September of 1893, I chose to start subventing all my trade routes. My plan here is to see how high I can get my GDP and see how much it would cost me in theory. I like to just occasionally push my economic limits from time to time. It does cost many millions of pounds, and after I also went to subsidize all my buildings, which is more of an SOL push. Because subsidies push prices down, it actually tends to reduce GDP, so we can see in November of 1893 that I've gone up to 21.7 SOL, but my GDP has risen to 1.3 billion and then promptly shrunk back to 1.1 billion. In terms of the story, this was President McCune's great betrayal. He seemed to be driving the nation out of debt, but then suddenly he went back on it and used subvention subsidies to once again rob the nation and put money into his coffers. This could not stand, and Roosevelt knew it was time to coup the government. He called on John Rockefeller to provide the funds for it, and an arrogant, complacent President McCune found himself trapped in the White House, his vice president leading an army of angry Chinese folks, who drove up in flashy Ford automobiles, by the way. President Rockefeller began his rule at this moment, neither a budgetarian nor a profiteer. He's an American. President Rockefeller took Vice President Roosevelt into the White House, where the two would begin a process of reopening elections. For the first time in decades, the Board of Executives has no say on this transformation of the nation. I want to add here, by the way, that it was about a 75% chance that Rockefeller became the new industrialist leader after McCune resigned, so I did this with the hopes that he would get the role, but not the guarantee. I don't normally do any safe scumming these kinds of videos without telling you, and I didn't do any safe scumming here, but I can tell you I absolutely would have done it if it didn't work out in order to make it happen. I'm not sure how the waiting for executives to become political leaders works, but for whatever reason, Mr. Rockefeller was the most likely to get it. Anyway, we're coming up on the end of the run, and with it, the end of the story, and my intention here is to essentially end the American technocracy, to return to some semblance of normalcy, but to let this era have some influence on the nation, beyond the most obvious ones. American democracy has been forever changed by the rule of the board, and I believe that is best reflected in the enactment of wealth voting. Suffrage will return, but America's cult of money has taken over the nation in essence. Even the people themselves clamor for elections which prioritize the clearly competent and wealthy Americans over the rabble. John Rockefeller, the final CEO President of America, is someone that doesn't really want the crushing responsibility of running the nation. You saw how tough it was for President McCune to keep things together and how much it pulled him away from running his own company. It is especially the case that President Rockefeller wants to be done with politics given the lack of motivation the board shows these days. They've grown fat and complacent. They hadn't expected a coup, nor were they ready or even willing to fight against it. Their current board is composed of a protectionist, Perry Randolph, running Sulfy's All-American Cotton. He's inept and romantic, not exactly your coup-stopping type. We still have Asa Craig, the feminist of Nezuko Carbon Steel, but he's in his 70s and lacks the fire he had back when he fought for women's rights. He's also a compliant grifter, leaving little space for passion in his heart. The CEO of the Charles Burke Panama American Society is the inexperienced and young Edward Choate, also a compliant nothing burger of an American. In charge of Yankees Fan Manufacturing Incorporated, we have Stapleton Wheeler, who's actually ideologically aligned with Rockefeller as a democratic restorationist. He didn't show public support for Rockefeller's new constitution, but effectively gave it by not opposing it. Nicholas Cameron of Gannon Patent Bananas Limited is an inept and literary decrepit old man whose only opposition to President Rockefeller was his arrogant ramblings of who knows best and the kids these days and so on. Needham Sims of Lalaloopsy's American Suez Corporation is in the same boat as Stapleton Wheeler of Yankees Fan Manufacturing Incorporated in that he too is a Democrat and therefore sides with Rockefeller. Finally, we reached Lawrence Crowninshield, another inept CEO, this time of Ford Motors. You know, I don't know why I have so many inept CEOs, but it works out nicely for why Rockefeller, an ambitious and persistent character, will end up being the most powerful of the CEOs, alongside his historical grandiosity of character. I've played a little bit longer at this point, just letting the GDP and SOL grow a bit more while massively deficit spending, up until the new law wealth voting came to be. President Rockefeller stayed on for the duration of the 180-day election campaign as an interim president. He ended the ransacking of America's budget by turning off all the subsidies and subventions, damn the consequences, and kicked his feet up, leaving his interim presidential duties to Vice President Roosevelt, who was overjoyed at the success of his campaign to bring America back to the people. In order to undo the damage done by the board, Roosevelt authorized new taxes on the rich and put a sales tax on automobiles intended to target those rich enough to afford the distinguished Ford vehicles which were so common among the upper class by now. Roosevelt himself ran for election to be president, but found himself outshined by the fact that his party is one of intellectuals and wise men. The intelligentsia just isn't well suited to mudslinging and winning of hearts of the people. Instead, the frontrunner was a fiery young man from the petite bourgeoisie who had the advantage of sharing a first name with Theodore Roosevelt. Theodore Neal, an ethno-nationalist, won the election by a relatively slim margin. His victory, historians say, can be pinned on the fact that many voters mixed him up with Theodore Roosevelt, who was broadly more popular, and the fact that President Neal had the support of the army, who may or may not have had some of its tallest, bulkiest soldiers glaring at anyone looking to support Roosevelt. After his loss, the dismayed Roosevelt retired from politics, feeling that if he can't be president, he can at least find solace in the fact that he's restored American democracy. Of course, with President Neal in power, it's entirely possible America may find itself worse for wear than it was under the CEOs. John Rockefeller, although formally retired from politics, still carries an immense clout in the government and with the people, which he uses to help moderate the regressive, populist politics of the new president. To me, this presents almost the perfect opportunity to take America down a reactionary path of fascism, but I'm going to hold off on that because, well, the game is barely running. Look, I'm really sorry about this, but let me play you just 10 seconds of raw, uncut footage. Look at the pace of the game now. I wanted to keep going, but I can't play this. It took me about 10 hours of recording to get this far, and I'm not doing 10 hours more for the 20 years of gameplay. I'll add this last bit here. I took a break, came back, played pretty casually for another hour and a half, which only took me to 1907, and I just hit the sort of unfun part of the game where you have like over $1 billion in the investment pool, over 20,000 in construction, just can't get the private sector to build anything because they outbuild their own infrastructure, and of course, because you're out of pops. Nothing of any real interest happened in this time, if I'm being honest, and my GDP peaked at around 2.2 billion with an SOL over 25. Now, if I did want to expand the economy more, I just have to go and conquer some Chinese or Russian states to get myself a ton of workers, but I'm good. I'll just say one more little self-shill thing here. If you want to help me get a better computer that can play Victoria 3 all the way to 1936 without taking 20 hours to do it, consider becoming a member. You get your name in the game, you get my gratitude, as well as early access to videos. Thanks. This was the story of the United Scientific Associations, the USA. It was a hell of a ride, and one whose story I mostly kind of made up in my head, but which I wish was actually more rooted in real mechanics. Victoria 3 executives don't really do a whole lot in reality, although they can become interest group leaders, which is cool. I had a ton of fun playing this run, and I hope it maybe inspires you to try some stuff of your own. It can be really fun to use resignations to get new laws that you want, although it can be downright overpowered to use a resignation to get some insane law like multiculturalism, which I do believe there is a way to do, although I haven't done it. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to check out the links in the description and the pinned comment about War Thunder. When you use my link to start playing, it helps the channel. You can start playing now on PC, PlayStation, Xbox, or mobile. New and returning players who haven't played in 6 months will also receive a bonus pack with some premium vehicles and other good stuff. Links in the description and pinned comment. Thank you for your time.